Sasha and Malia Obama were no longer the little girls who once lived in the White House. They had grown into graceful young women, and though their lives had changed in many ways, they still enjoyed doing ordinary things whenever they could. That afternoon, they were boarding a regular flight just like any other passenger. They had chosen to travel without too much attention, keeping their clothes simple and their appearance relaxed so people would not recognize them immediately. The airport was busy as usual, with travelers rushing from one gate to another. Announcements echoed through the halls, suitcases rolled across the floor, and the smell of coffee drifted out from small shops. Sasha and Malia carried their bags and chatted quietly, glad to be spending some time together. They had been taught from a young age to handle attention with calmness, but they always appreciated moments when they could blend in like everyone else. When they boarded the plane, they found their seats near the middle of the cabin. Both sisters smiled politely at the people already seated nearby. A couple of passengers looked up, some immediately recognizing them, but most paid little attention. For the sisters, this was a small comfort. Traveling without constant eyes on them was a rare gift. They placed their carry-on bags in the overhead compartment, settled into their seats, and buckled up. Sasha pulled out a book she had been reading, while Malia scrolled through her phone, laughing softly at a message from a friend. The plane buzzed with the normal sounds of passengers settling in, luggage being pushed into compartments, flight attendants giving instructions, and children asking questions loudly. Just as things seemed calm, a flight attendant walked down the aisle. Her uniform was neat and her smile seemed practiced, but her tone changed when she stopped beside the Obama sisters. She leaned slightly forward and asked them to move. At first, the sisters thought she might be asking for a routine reason. Maybe the airline needed to adjust passengers for balance, or maybe there was a mistake in the seating chart. But then the attendant explained that another passenger, a white businessman, wanted to sit in their seats. The request caught them off guard. Sasha and Malia exchanged quick glances, their eyes showing surprise. Sasha, who had always been gentle but firm, looked up and said politely, "I'm sorry, but these are our seats. We have tickets for them." She even reached into her bag to take out the boarding passes, holding them up as proof. The flight attendant, however, didn't look at the tickets for long. She kept her professional smile but spoke with a tone that was firmer than before. "Yes, but we'd appreciate it if you moved to another section. This gentleman needs these seats." The businessman, standing a few feet away, looked impatient. He didn't say much, only folded his arms and waited, as if it were a small matter and the sisters should simply agree. Around them, some passengers began to notice. A few looked curious, whispering softly to each other, while others simply watched in silence, pretending not to hear. Malia, usually calm and thoughtful, tried to reason. She said gently, "These are the seats we were given. We don't understand why we should move." Her words were not loud, but they carried strength. She remembered how her parents had always taught her that dignity comes from staying calm, even when others are unfair. Still, the flight attendant didn't back down. Her voice grew sharper, though still polite on the surface. "Please just move to the back. It will only take a minute." She gestured toward the rear of the plane as though it was already decided. The sisters now felt the eyes of many strangers on them. They were used to attention, but this moment was different. It wasn't about being recognized as the daughters of a former president. It was about being treated in a way that felt wrong. They weren't asking for special treatment. They only wanted the same respect every paying passenger deserved. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Sasha still held the boarding passes in her hand. Malia glanced at her sister, and they both stayed seated, unsure what to do next. They didn't want to create a scene, but they also didn't want to give up their seats without reason. The businessman cleared his throat, clearly growing restless. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, and one older woman shook her head slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. A young boy sitting 2 rows ahead turned in his seat to watch, his wide eyes showing curiosity. Inside, Sasha felt a wave of embarrassment. She wasn't used to being asked to prove her place. She had been raised to believe in fairness, kindness, and respect. Malia, sitting beside her, pressed her lips together, her mind racing. They could hear the hum of the plane's engines as the situation stretched on. Despite the discomfort, the sisters did not raise their voices or argue harshly. Instead, they chose patience. They remembered how their father often told them that sometimes silence can be stronger than words. Their quiet resistance, sitting firmly in their seats with tickets in hand, spoke louder than any argument could have. The tension in the cabin grew heavier, and though the flight attendant tried to maintain control, she seemed unsettled by the refusal. She looked around, perhaps hoping another attendant would step in, but no one did. Passengers continued to whisper, their expressions a mix of confusion and unease. The sisters remained seated, calm but firm, their eyes steady. It was in that moment, before anything else happened, that they realized how quickly a simple flight could turn into something far more meaningful. What they didn't know was that the next few minutes would completely change the mood inside the plane. Someone was about to step into the cabin who would make the entire room pause. Someone who would remind everyone about fairness, respect, and dignity in the simplest, yet most powerful way. And for the sisters sitting side by side, heart steady but unsure of what would happen next, this was only the beginning of a story they would remember for the rest of their lives. The quietness inside the airplane cabin slowly turned into a soft buzz as more passengers noticed the unusual scene unfolding. Sasha and Malia Obama still sat firmly in their seats holding their tickets, while the flight attendant remained standing in front of them, her voice calm, but her expression showing a touch of impatience. The businessman, tall and confident in his expensive suit, stood nearby with his arms crossed, clearly waiting for the sisters to move. Sasha lowered her eyes for a moment and looked at the ticket in her hand. It was simple proof that the seats belonged to them. She gently set it on her lap, her fingers resting on the paper as though holding on to it gave her strength. She was not used to being questioned in this way, but she remembered what her parents had always taught, to never let discomfort take away her grace. Malia, sitting beside her, adjusted her posture and leaned forward slightly. She spoke softly but clearly. "We understand, but these are our seats. We have every right to sit here. We don't want to cause trouble." The flight attendant forced a smile, though it looked more like a mask than genuine warmth. "I understand your point," she replied. "But it would make things easier if you could just move. The gentleman here is requesting these seats. Please cooperate." The businessman gave a small nod, as if agreeing with the attendant's words, though he still hadn't spoken directly to the sisters. His silence felt heavier than words. He looked down at his watch, then back at them, as though their resistance was simply an inconvenience. Around them, passengers had grown quieter. Some looked away, pretending to be lost in their magazines or phones, but their ears were tuned into every word. Others stared directly, curiosity and disbelief written across their faces. A young mother holding a baby shifted uncomfortably, and an older man near the window frowned at the scene. The sisters felt the weight of so many eyes, but they stayed composed. Malia folded her hands neatly in her lap and glanced at her sister with a look of encouragement. Sasha gave her a small nod as if to say, "We are together in this." Inside, Sasha's heart beat faster than usual. She had always been the quieter one, but moments like this tested her courage. She reminded herself of the lessons her parents repeated throughout childhood. Respect yourself, even when others forget to respect you. The flight attendant sighed, lowering her voice but still pressing. "Look, it will only take a moment. You can sit further back and we'll make sure you're comfortable." Malia raised her eyebrows slightly and responded with calmness that carried more strength than any loud argument could. "But why should we move when we already have our seats? We paid like everyone else. We are not asking for more, only for what belongs to us." Her words lingered in the air. They were not sharp, not angry, but they held a quiet firmness that was difficult to challenge. The businessman shifted his weight and finally spoke, his tone casual but impatient. "It's just a small thing. Why make it complicated? Seats can be changed." His words felt light to him, but to the sisters they carried the weight of dismissal, as though their comfort and dignity mattered less. Sasha wanted to respond, but she chose silence. She had learned that not every moment required a reply. Sometimes silence itself was a kind of strength. A few passengers stirred. The older woman sitting 2 rows behind leaned slightly forward, whispering to the man next to her, "They shouldn't have to move. They have their tickets." The man nodded quietly, though neither of them spoke louder. The young boy who had turned around earlier was still watching, his wide eyes fixed on the sisters. His mother tapped his shoulder to turn back, but even she could not hide the look of concern on her face. The flight attendant now looked uncertain. She glanced toward the front of the cabin, perhaps considering calling another crew member. She was used to passengers following her instructions quickly, but this was different. These young women were polite, calm, and steady. They weren't refusing with rudeness. They were standing their ground with dignity. For Sasha and Malia, every second felt longer than it actually was. They could hear the soft hum of the plane's systems, the shuffle of feet as late passengers boarded, and the faint cough of someone across the aisle. Yet all of it seemed muted compared to the intensity of the moment they were in. Malia quietly folded her arms, not as a sign of stubbornness, but as a way to hold herself steady. She could sense the frustration of the attendant and the businessman, but she also felt the quiet support of a few passengers who were silently rooting for them. Inside her mind, she thought about the countless times her father had reminded her that dignity is not given. It is held. And once held, it should never be easily surrendered. The businessman cleared his throat again, speaking louder this time. "We're wasting time here. Just let me sit and we can all move on." The attendant straightened up, perhaps encouraged by his words, but she was still unsure. Her eyes shifted from him to the sisters, then back to the row behind them, as though searching for a way to end the standoff. At that moment, Sasha leaned closer to Malia and whispered something that only her sister could hear. "We should stay calm. We're not wrong." Malia gave a small nod, her expression serene but firm. The two sisters then returned their gaze to the attendant, not with defiance, but with quiet certainty. Their eyes said what their words didn't need to repeat. "We belong here." The cabin grew heavier with silence again. The tension was almost visible, like a cloud hanging low in the air. Everyone waited for what would happen next. Would the sisters finally give in? Would the attendant push harder? Would the businessman get his way? What the sisters didn't know was that someone very familiar to them, someone who understood dignity more deeply than most, was only moments away from stepping into the cabin, and with his presence everything about the scene was about to change. But in that moment, before anything shifted, Sasha and Malia had already shown something powerful. Without raising their voices, without causing disruption, they were teaching everyone watching a quiet lesson, that standing firm, even in the smallest moments, can carry great strength. And so, as the flight attendant hesitated and the businessman tapped his foot impatiently, the sisters sat tall in their seats, calm, graceful, and unshaken. The atmosphere inside the airplane cabin had become thick with silence. The businessman's impatience grew. The flight attendant looked uncertain, and the Obama sisters remained seated with quiet strength. Passengers nearby exchanged glances but said little. It felt as though time had slowed down, every second stretching longer than the last. Then the sound of footsteps came from the front of the plane. The boarding process was still finishing, and a few more passengers were making their way inside. Among them was a tall figure whose presence was instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever seen him before. Dressed in a simple jacket and carrying a small travel bag, Barack Obama entered the cabin. Some passengers gasped softly, others whispered his name under their breath. A few even pulled out their phones, though they hesitated to use them openly. Obama's presence had a way of changing the air around him. He carried himself with ease, not needing to raise his voice or make a scene to draw attention. His calm smile and steady step were enough. Sasha and Malia saw him almost at the same time. Relief swept over their faces, though they kept their composure. They didn't want to signal too loudly what was happening, but inside, their hearts lifted. They knew their father would understand. Obama walked down the aisle, nodding politely at passengers who greeted him with quiet smiles. He reached the row where his daughters sat, and immediately he noticed something was off. They weren't relaxed as usual. They looked tense, their backs straight, their eyes steady. The flight attendant stood nearby with folded hands, and the businessman shifted uncomfortably beside her. "What's going on here?" Obama asked, his tone calm but carrying a weight that made everyone nearby pause. The flight attendant straightened quickly, her polite smile returning, though it now looked uneasy. She cleared her throat. "Oh, nothing serious, sir. Just a small seating matter. We were asking your daughters to move so this gentleman could have these seats." Obama looked at his daughters. Sasha still held the boarding passes in her lap. Malia gave a small shake of her head as if to say, "It's true, but we've been calm." Obama took the tickets gently from Sasha's hand and looked at them. He nodded once, then turned his attention back to the attendant. "These are their assigned seats," he said in a steady voice. "Why should they be asked to move?" The cabin grew even quieter. Every nearby passenger leaned in slightly, careful not to look too obvious but unable to resist watching. The businessman shifted his feet and finally spoke. "I needed these seats," he said, his voice carrying confidence but also a trace of nervousness now that Obama stood before him. It seemed easier to ask them to switch. Obama looked at him for a moment, not harshly but with steady eyes. Then he turned back to the flight attendant. "With all due respect," he said gently, "my daughters have tickets just like everyone else. They don't need to move simply because someone else wants their place." The attendant opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her face showed conflict, part embarrassment, part nervousness. She had not expected this situation to involve someone like him. Obama didn't raise his voice, but his words carried far. Passengers sitting several rows away could hear him clearly. His calmness had a certain strength, stronger than if he had shouted. Sasha and Malia remained seated, watching their father. They felt a mix of pride and comfort. He wasn't only standing for them, he was standing for fairness itself. The businessman looked away for a moment, his confidence fading. He realized that the situation no longer favored him. His arms uncrossed and he shifted back, suddenly less certain of his request. Obama spoke again, his tone gentle but firm. "Flying is not about who is more important or who looks the part. Everyone here is equal once they hold a ticket. That's the rule, and that's respect." His words seemed to hang in the air like a reminder, not only to the flight attendant and the businessman, but also to everyone watching. The flight attendant lowered her eyes slightly and nodded. "Yes, of course, sir. My apologies. There must have been some confusion." Passengers around them exchanged looks. Some smiled quietly, others nodded in agreement. The older woman who had whispered earlier now sat taller, clearly pleased with what she was seeing. The young boy who had been watching so intently looked at Obama with wide admiration, as though witnessing a real-life lesson. Obama turned back to his daughters. "You're fine here," he said softly, his voice carrying warmth now. "Don't worry." Sasha smiled faintly, relief spreading through her chest. Malia gave a small nod, her eyes bright with respect for her father's calm handling of the moment. The businessman muttered something under his breath and stepped back toward his assigned row. The flight attendant excused herself quickly, moving toward the front of the cabin, though her cheeks carried a faint flush. The tension that had filled the cabin moments earlier began to ease. Passengers who had been holding their breath finally relaxed. Some whispered to each other while others simply sat back thoughtful. Obama placed his bag in the overhead compartment and sat down across the aisle from his daughters. He leaned slightly toward them and said in a low voice, "You did the right thing by staying calm. I'm proud of you." The sisters nodded, their hearts lighter now. They had tried to handle the situation with dignity, and their father's quiet strength had shown them that they were not alone. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the atmosphere shifted. Passengers seemed a little more respectful, a little more aware. The moment had reminded them that fairness was not about titles, wealth, or appearance. It was about principle. For Sasha and Malia, the lesson was deeper. They had faced embarrassment, whispers, and pressure, but they had not given in. And when their father arrived, his calm presence reminded them that dignity is best defended with patience, clarity, and respect. As the engines roared and the plane began to move down the runway, the sisters leaned back into their seats. They glanced at each other, a silent exchange passing between them. This flight was no longer just about traveling from one city to another. It had become a memory, a story that would stay with them forever. And though the businessman sat in another row, and the flight attendant busied herself at the front, the sisters knew the truth. They had been part of a moment where fairness stood taller than pride, and calmness spoke louder than power. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane lifted into the air. Outside, clouds drifted across the sky, soft and white. Inside, Sasha and Malia felt peace returning. They had not just held their seats, they had held their dignity, and beside them, their father's presence was a quiet shield, reminding them that respect is not given by others. It is lived even in the smallest moments. After the plane had taken off and leveled out, a calm silence settled over the cabin. Passengers returned to their routines, but the mood had shifted. The tense energy from before had disappeared. replaced by a sense of quiet respect. Many people glanced toward Sasha and Malia, who were now more relaxed, and toward their father, whose calm authority had settled everything. Sasha leaned back into her seat, her mind still processing what had just happened. The small moments of discomfort had felt much bigger while they were happening. But now, in the calm of the plane, she realized just how much had changed in a few minutes. She thought about how quickly a simple request to move seats had turned into a lesson about dignity, patience, and courage. Malia sat quietly beside her sister, scrolling lightly on her phone but not really paying attention to the screen. She was replaying the events in her mind, thinking about how they had remained calm and how their father had arrived just in time to support them. The lesson was clear. Courage and respect can sometimes be quiet, but they are always powerful. Their father leaned slightly toward them. "You handled that well," he said softly. "I know it wasn't easy. Staying calm in moments like that is harder than it seems." His voice was gentle but carried a warmth that made them feel understood and supported. "Remember, standing your ground doesn't have to be loud or angry. It can be quiet and strong like you just showed." Sasha smiled faintly. "It had felt strange at first," she admitted. "I didn't know what to do, but I didn't want to just give in." "That's the right feeling," Obama replied. "You don't give in just because someone wants you to. But you also don't have to fight with anger. Calmness and clarity are sometimes stronger than any words." The sisters nodded, understanding his point more deeply than ever. They realized that dignity isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about knowing your worth and standing by it, even when others don't understand. Around them, passengers quietly observed. A few people whispered to each other, still clearly affected by what they had witnessed. The older woman who had been concerned earlier smiled softly at the sisters, a small gesture of approval. The young boy who had been watching with wide eyes kept looking toward them, clearly inspired. Even the flight attendant, now moving down the aisle, seemed to carry herself differently, perhaps a bit more thoughtful, more aware of the power of respect and fairness. As the flight continued, the sisters felt a sense of relief. The tension had passed, and they could finally relax. They looked out the small airplane windows and saw the clouds drifting by, soft and peaceful. The bright sunlight reflected off the white tops, and for a moment everything felt calm and steady, a stark contrast to the tense situation from before. Their father continued to talk quietly with them, sharing stories from when he was young and how he had faced challenges in life. He told them about moments when he had to remain calm, even when situations felt unfair or discouraging. He explained that staying composed wasn't always easy, but it made a lasting difference. "You see," he said, "how you act when no one is watching often matters more than when people are looking. Character shows itself in small moments as much as in big ones. And today you showed a lot of character." Sasha and Malia listened carefully. They realized that this experience on the plane wasn't just about seats. It was about the kind of people they wanted to be. People who could stay calm under pressure, treat others with respect, and insist on fairness without being rude or aggressive. The sisters spent the rest of the flight reflecting quietly. They didn't need to discuss it much. Their father's presence, the reactions of other passengers, and the calm they had maintained were enough to leave a lasting impression. The simple act of holding their seats had become something meaningful, something they would remember for a long time. Passengers nearby continued to look occasionally, some with smiles, some with quiet nods. Everyone seemed to sense that something important had happened, even if it was subtle. It wasn't a dramatic scene with shouting or confrontation. It was a quiet display of dignity and strength, and that made it more memorable. The businessman, who had initially wanted them to move, now sat quietly in his row. He avoided looking directly at them, perhaps realizing that his request had been inappropriate even if unintentionally. The flight attendant occasionally glanced back, her expression thoughtful. Even in a few short minutes, the dynamics of the plane had changed. Obama leaned back, smiling faintly at his daughters. "I know you didn't want to make a scene," he said, "and you didn't. That's what makes this even better. You stood up for yourselves without needing to argue. That's a skill that will help you in life more than you know." Sasha nodded. "I think I understand now. Being strong doesn't mean being loud or angry. It means knowing your rights and standing by them." "That's right," he replied. "And it also means showing respect to others even if they don't show it to you. You've done both today." For the rest of the flight, the sisters felt a sense of calm accomplishment. It was a quiet victory, one without applause or recognition from most passengers, yet it mattered deeply to them. They had faced a situation that could have been stressful and embarrassing, but they had handled it with grace and patience. As the plane began its descent, they looked out the windows again. The clouds seemed closer now, soft and steady, almost like a reflection of the calm they had found inside themselves. They realized that even small moments, like sitting in the right seat, could teach important lessons about life, dignity, and courage. By the time the plane landed, the sisters felt lighter. The brief tension of the flight seemed like a distant memory. Passengers quietly collected their belongings and prepared to leave, some still stealing glances at the young women who had quietly shown strength and calm. Once they were off the plane, Obama walked with his daughters through the terminal. He smiled at them and said, "Remember this feeling. You didn't just stand your ground. You did it with grace. That will always matter more than anything else." Sasha and Malia nodded, feeling proud and supported. They realized that life would present many challenges, both big and small. Some would be public and some private, but the lessons from today would stay with them forever. Staying calm, treating others with respect, and standing up for themselves without anger was something they could carry into every situation they faced. Even as they left the airport and stepped into the normal rhythms of travel, they knew this moment would remain in their memory. It wasn't a story of confrontation, but of quiet courage. It wasn't about power or influence, but about fairness and dignity. And it wasn't just a lesson for them. It was a lesson for everyone who had watched, even quietly, from their seats on that plane. The plane had landed and the passengers were gathering their belongings, preparing to leave. Sasha and Malia Obama stood beside their father, feeling a mixture of relief and reflection. What had started as a simple flight had turned into something much more meaningful. Though it had been a short journey, the lessons they had experienced would stay with them for a long time. As they walked through the terminal, the sisters spoke quietly to each other. "I still can't believe it happened like that," Malia said softly. "I never expected someone would be asked to move just because of who they are." "It felt unfair," Sasha nodded. "Yes, but we stayed calm, and Dad helped when we needed it." That made all the difference. Their father smiled at them. "You did more than stay calm," he said. "You handled yourself with dignity. You didn't respond with anger or frustration. That's how you show strength in situations like these." The sisters looked around as people passed by. Some glanced at them and smiled politely, perhaps recognizing them, perhaps just noticing the calm confidence they carried. Even in a crowded airport, they felt a sense of quiet dignity surrounding them, a feeling that no moment of discomfort could erase. Obama continued speaking softly, guiding them through the lessons he hoped they would carry. "Life will always present situations where you feel pressured to do something you don't want to. Sometimes it's small, like a seat on a plane. Other times it may be bigger, more complicated. But the way you respond, calmly, respectfully, firmly, matters most. That is how people will see your character." Malia listened carefully, absorbing every word. She thought about the moments in the cabin when she had felt tense, the uncertainty, the whispers of passengers, and the impatience of the businessman. It had felt heavy at the time, but now she saw the lesson clearly. Courage is not about loud words or confrontation. It is about patience, self-respect, and clarity. Sasha agreed silently, feeling a sense of pride. She had learned that being treated unfairly does not require an immediate reaction. One can respond with dignity and still maintain one's place, one's rights, and one's calm. The experience had taught them that fairness is not just an abstract idea. It is something that must be held, even in small moments, and that sometimes the quietest actions speak the loudest. As they walked through the terminal, the sisters noticed other travelers glancing their way. Some people seemed inspired, others curious, and a few simply respectful. The event on the plane had left a subtle mark, not as a spectacle, but as a quiet demonstration of fairness and courage. Even strangers had witnessed a lesson without needing to see drama or argument, just calm, dignity, and quiet strength. When they reached the exit, the sunlight streamed into the terminal, bright and warm. Sasha and Malia stepped outside with their father, taking a deep breath of fresh air. The world felt wider, brighter, and somehow more just. They had experienced a situation that could have been uncomfortable, even upsetting. Yet it had turned into a moment of growth and understanding. Obama paused and looked at them both. Remember, it's not only about you, he said. How you respond in moments like these affects others too. People are always watching, even if they don't say anything. Your actions teach lessons to everyone around you, sometimes quietly, sometimes clearly. Today, you showed a lot to the people on that plane. Sasha and Malia felt the weight and truth of those words. They understood that standing firm with respect and clarity could influence not just the immediate moment, but the larger world. Sometimes the lessons that matter most are the ones shared quietly, without announcements or recognition. As they walked to the car, they reflected on the small details that had shaped the experience. The way the flight attendant had first asked them to move, the businessman's impatience, and even the curious eyes of passengers. All of it had contributed to a moment that was now more than just a flight. It was a memory, a story that could inspire others about fairness, respect, and courage. Even later, when they told friends and family about the experience, it was clear that the story carried weight. It wasn't about conflict, anger, or confrontation. It was about how ordinary people, even in small ways, can stand up for themselves and others with grace. It was about the quiet power of dignity and how calm action can speak louder than any argument. The sisters also realized that this event would stay with them as a reminder of their father's guidance. Barack Obama had always emphasized the importance of character, patience, and empathy. Today had been a real-life example of everything he had taught them. He had not only defended them, but also modeled how to handle situations with authority, fairness, and calm strength. In the weeks that followed, the sisters often remembered that flight. They would recall how it felt to remain calm under pressure, how important it was to trust themselves, and how dignity and respect could influence the actions of others. It was not a story of anger or frustration. It was a story of courage, fairness, and quiet influence. Even in ordinary moments, boarding a plane, waiting in line, or walking through a crowded terminal, they remembered the lessons of that day. The small victory of keeping their seats had become symbolic, a reminder that fairness matters and that every person has the right to be treated with respect. The experience also strengthened their confidence. They realized that facing uncomfortable situations does not require them to fight or shout. It requires thoughtfulness, calmness, and clarity. And sometimes, as in their case, a calm response could have an impact far greater than immediate action or argument. Looking back, the sisters understood that the lesson was not just for them. It was for everyone on that plane and everyone who would hear the story later. Fairness and respect are not complicated ideas. They are lived in every small decision, every interaction, and every moment when one chooses to act with dignity. As the days went on, Sasha and Malia continued to carry themselves with that quiet confidence. They remembered the curious glances of passengers, the supportive whispers of strangers, and the calm words of their father. Each memory reminded them that courage can be quiet, that respect is powerful, and that dignity is something worth holding on to, no matter the situation. Even years later, when they looked back on that flight, it was not just a story about seats or passengers. It was a story about strength, fairness, and character. It was a story that reminded them, and would remind others, that every person deserves respect, and that standing up for oneself can be done with grace and calmness, without anger or confrontation. Sasha and Malia knew that life would continue to present challenges, big and small. But they also knew that the lessons from that flight would stay with them forever. They would remember how to act with dignity, how to maintain patience, and how to influence others positively, just by being calm and firm. And as they moved forward in life, this experience became one of many moments that shaped them into thoughtful, confident, and fair individuals. They learned that even ordinary moments can carry extraordinary lessons, and that the quiet strength of dignity and respect can leave a lasting impression far beyond what anyone might expect. In the end, the flight was more than just a journey from one city to another. It was a journey of learning, growth, and understanding. For Sasha and Malia, and for everyone who witnessed or later heard about it, the story became a reminder that courage is not always loud, that fairness matters, and that dignity is a choice we make every day.